I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of theCorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you for having me on again. Always a pleasure to be here.
Japan is hosting the G7 meeting, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. How big of a deal is this being taken as in Japan?
It's a pretty big deal for a lot of reasons. Whenever you get a lot of world leaders together, obviously that's going to be a big event. But I think especially right now in Japanese political and economic circumstances, I think it's pretty important to the country in a lot of different ways. And some of it is being seen as something of a glorification of Abe's government and the types of policies he's attempting to enact right now, the rising neo-nationalism that he's attempting to foster in Japan, which is actually part of the reason that the summit is taking place in Ise, a rather small village that's ill-prepared for handling such a big event as this, but it's the site of Ise Jingu, a Japanese shrine that is particularly important to Abe's particular brand of Shintoism. So it's all related to sort of a re-rise of Japan, or what people would like to see as a re-rise of Japan. But this is, of course, taking place at the same time as Japan continues to flounder, despite 5 years now of trying to pump money into the economy desperately in any way that they can. That has proven once again to be a load of hooey. The deflationary pressures that have been the bugbear of the Japanese economy for the last 2 decades show absolutely no signs of letting up. There was a brief spot of good news last week with a growth of 1.7% in the first quarter of this year being announced last week, but that ultimately was a pretty short-lived bit of celebration, as we found out that exports fell sharply in April, and that manufacturing activity has suffered the fastest contraction since Abe took power 4 years ago. So there's really no bright spots out there. And I think that this is the context in which this summit is taking place. And Japan really, I think, desperately wants to try to maintain and stabilize the yen versus the dollar, which any sort of instability in that relationship causes a lot of pains for the Japanese economy. Whether it's rising or falling, it causes a lot of uncertainty and a lot of pressure on the largely export-centered economy. And the yen has already appreciated almost 9% this year against the dollar, so they're desperate to try to stop that. And the flip side of that is the U.S. has now actually added Japan to its watch list of potential currency manipulators alongside China, because they're putting up such a fuss about this and saying that they will interact to prop up the yen as it continues to appreciate.
Wow, a 9% increase. Of course, in Canada, we would love to see a 9% increase in the price of the loonie, which has taken a battering. It did get up to 80 cents, but then rapidly fell after that. Closely tied to the price of oil, but not just oil, because oil's close to $50 now, but yet the loonie continues to lose value.
Yes, that's right.
So this race to the bottom, who's going to have a currency worth nothing? Venezuela?
They seem to be most of the way there at this point, yes. And it is a beggar thy neighbor type of policy that's been going on for years now, and that has accelerated in recent years. And we've seen this in a number of different ways, including the central banks getting more and more desperate. And we've seen a number of countries, including Japan, go into negative interest rate territory with their benchmark rates. So they've thrown everything, including the kitchen sink, at this to try to maintain their relative position, their relative advantage in the export markets. And there's really not much more that they can do about this. And in Japan, it really is at a crisis moment because the deflationary pressure is first and foremost on wages itself, and then secondarily on prices and other factors, so that the Japanese workers feel the pinch the most. And perhaps counterintuitively, the average household savings for Japan has just hit a record high of $164,000 per household. But that's not because everything is great and peachy keen in the economy, so people are getting more money to save. It's that people are pinching their pennies even harder because they are more uncertain than ever about this economy, and there's really no bright spots. So people are saving and scrimping and saving on every yen that they make, and so they have a very large war chest saved up. But that's really, I think, just a hedge against the inevitable downfall or haircut or whatever is going to happen to the really underfunded pension system here.
Was the idea of negative interest rates to get them to cash up or to cough up some of that cash because it doesn't make any money in the bank?
Yes, the ultimate idea is to get money moving through the economy again. And of course, that was what the QE that they've been doing for the last few years has been about. That's what the negative interest rates is about. And as the still anemic economic activity here indicates, it hasn't really fundamentally changed anything. And Abe was ultimately elected 4 years ago on the basis of his promise to get the economy moving again. He was promising all of these structural reforms and all of this that have not taken place and have not come through. So it's been basically hope and change Japanese economy edition, and it has provided about as much hope and change as the Obama administration did in the U.S. with all the promises that he made when he was getting elected. So once again, I mean, politicians say anything to get elected and then say anything to stay in power, but I think the numbers speak for themselves, and the numbers are pretty bad.
Any indication that Japan will change its negative interest rate policy?
There's no indication that they're planning to do so anytime in the near future. But then again, I don't think they would give forward indication of that. Kuroda, the governor of the Bank of Japan, has proven that he likes to surprise the markets, including surprising by taking them into negative interest rate territory 1 week after he said he wouldn't do that. So I don't think we could trust such pronouncements even if they were being made.
The U.S. Fed, on the other hand, has said it may raise rates up to 3 times this year.
It's a possibility. I think that really the jawboning that goes around about the possibility of rate rises or whether they're holding back on rate rises, that type of rhetoric and talk is actually has more of an effect on the markets than the rates themselves. By the time the rate hike or cuts come in, they generally have been priced in by the markets because the Fed does telegraph everything that they do well in advance. So I think that what they're trying to do basically is to say to the markets, look, everything's going well, everything's on the up. We raised rates successfully last December, and the markets didn't come crashing down, so we're going to do it again and again. Trying to basically get the markets to price that in and to get that new reality embedded into place. And as long as that works, it's good for the Fed. It means that they're still masters of reality. But there is a point at which reality does assert itself and comes crashing back in to spoil the best laid plans of mice men and central bankers.
Other countries that have hosted the G7, the G20, APEC have all seen major protests. Any public unrest in Japan?
There is a little bit, but not necessarily because of the G7. It's actually in Okinawa. There was a recent murder that took place from an ex-Marine murdered in Okinawa. And it's shades of a 1995 incident that happened there where there was a rape involving some U.S. servicemen of a schoolgirl in Okinawa that caused a lot of protest, obviously, at the time. We're seeing some protests happening and protests being renewed in Okinawa because of this, which is complicating Obama's visit, which was supposed to be something of a victory lap and niceties, but this has now been added to the agenda in the meeting between Abe and Obama. So there is protest about the military issue, not so much about the G7 itself, which I think most people are just bemused by, if not slightly happy to have, the big world leaders here in their humble nation.
Do people in Japan realize without the U.S. military, China would be licking its lips?
Well, yes. I mean, it's ultimately a question of the sort of neo-nationalists who want to see an increased insurgence in Japanese self-defense force becoming a real military, and then there's the peace faction here, which adheres to the Japanese Constitution, Article 9, that Japan is a non-violent, non-war-making state, and that the forces are clashing, I think, at a greater frequency right now about the vision for the future of Japan and what it really means. And yes, I mean, there's always the presence of China, which is always used as that sort of boogeyman to try to keep the powers of peace in check. Oh, look how many times we had to send up jets to intercept those dastardly Chinese. I think it's used as a bit of a political calculation here, just in the same way in China, the Chinese government uses the threat, the boogeyman of those Japanese imperial warmongers as a way to keep their own population in check.
Those two countries really do not get along.
No, but to a large extent that is manufactured, and there's been some interesting reporting in recent months about how, for example, in China, a lot of things are obviously censored or not allowed to be talked about on national TV and things, but something that is actively encouraged is historical war dramas about the Japanese occupation in Manchuria and about that time frame, so that there are an exceptional number of dramas that are taking place all the time and being shown on national TV and in the theaters there in China that are all about, how horrible and disastrous the Japanese presence was. And interestingly, there's a sort of growing movement in China of people against that people are kind of kicking back against that propaganda narrative, which is so evidently a propaganda narrative that's being forced by the Chinese government on the entertainment industry in China. And so now people are making parodies of that and spreading them online because it's some of the dramas that they put out are just so over the top propagandistic.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. China's economy, people say it's slowing, yet their demand for oil hasn't been higher ever.
Well, yes, slowing relative to what? Ultimately, I think everyone agrees that the Chinese economy is still expanding, but it's expanding at a slower rate. And I think that's what people are discussing. Of course, the official GDP numbers are, they have this 6.5% target of year-on-year increase, but, will they meet it, won't they? Regardless, again, of how accurate those particular numbers are, which is highly disputed. Still, the consensus is that China continues to expand, and there continues to be the rise in the poverty level, less people in poverty, more people coming into the middle class, more people purchasing cars and getting into that sort of lifestyle. So of course there's going to be a rise in a lot of different prices, including oil and demand for oil. But on the flip side of that, there is a contraction, at least in expectations, and that's being shown in a lot of different ways, including, in fact, in the recent unveiling of the country's military budget. President Xi Jinping just recently said that because of the economic downturn, i.e. the contraction in the expected rate of increase, they're actually not going to increase the budget for the People's Liberation Army as much as they expected. So they were expecting to raise the budget by X number of percent. Now that it's only going to be 7.6%, they're only going to increase the budget by to $145 billion for the coming year. So it's kind of eating into everything, this lowered expectations of the Chinese economy.
Well, I know China is trying to build high-tech weapons to match what America has and the Russians have. Is that kind of a dead-end battle? Because it seems to me the Cold War, we spent billions and trillions of dollars and not a shot was fired.
Well, a dead-end battle from whose perspective? From the perspective of the manufacturers who get all of the contracts? Of course not. That's exactly what they're in it for. And I think that's largely what the Cold War buildup was all about. It's why, for example, the missile gap was the big issue of going into Kennedy's administration back in 1960. It was, we have to close the missile gap, and that was something that Kennedy campaigned for. And when he got into office, he found out, actually, that was complete propaganda. There is no missile gap. The U.S. was way ahead of the Soviets, and that was all just propaganda that's being used by the military-industrial contractors. So I think that's the Cold War in a nutshell, and that's what so much of it was about. And I think that's what this new Cold War, if that's what this really is, I think that's what it's about too. And if that is the case, then it's win-win-win for the manufacturers as the Asia-Pacific region. Generally, the military budgets are increasing across the region, and military contractors are winning big contracts, including South Korea buying $1 billion of drones, and Japan spending more on its defense, and now China, of course, continuing to raise its budget for the People's Liberation Army. Again, there are people who are making lots of money over this, and I think it isn't because there is going to be an immediate military conflict. I don't think there really is that. I think it's just the presence of these forces in the region and the sort of threat which is used as a way to blackmail countries into going along with increases in military budgets.
President Obama was in Vietnam and lifted the U.S. embargo on trading arms to Vietnam. That's part of this whole process, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. That's a perfect example of this. Lifting an embargo against selling arms to a country because, well, they're threatened by China in the South China Sea and in other ways, so they have to build up their military. And we've seen increasing military cooperation, or at least overtures towards military cooperation between the U.S. and Vietnam in recent years. Highly ironic, obviously, given the history, but politics make strange bedfellows, and I think this is the perfect example of how China increases its military, and as a response, well, everyone in the region has to increase their military, and as a response to that, well, China has to increase its military some more. So it's just the ratcheting up, and as I say, there are people who are making good paydays from all of this.
Now, we know China and Vietnam were best of buddies during the Vietnam War, but Vietnam for 5,000 years has resisted efforts by China to invade them. Is that why they'd be open to American weapons? Absolutely.
I mean, I think that the Chinese-Vietnam alliance is not really such a steadfast alliance at this point, and I don't know the extent to which that has ever overridden the sort of bigger picture of this, which, as you say, is resistance towards the being conquered by China. And I think that has to be at the forefront of the mind of the Vietnamese government, which knows that it probably has its bread buttered by not aligning itself too closely with the Chinese and making sure that it can militarily resist any sort of Chinese aggression. Because the existential threat would really more come from China and the possibility of a growing Chinese military presence being more proactive, shall we say, in its military endeavors in the future.
And, of course, warming up relations with the U.S. also, I guess, would improve their tourism, which, for friends of mine who visited Vietnam, they said it's a beautiful place to visit and very affordable.
I have heard that, too. I have never been myself, but I've heard from a lot of people that it's a really enjoyable place to visit. So perhaps more Americans will be doing so in the near future. I'm not really sure how that will pan out. But anyway, probably more U.S. servicemen are going to be visiting the region in the future as this focus starts to shift towards the Asia-Pacific generally.
Go visit the kids they fathered during the war. Well, also another thing about Vietnam with the lower labor cost, is it true that factories are closing in China and moving to Vietnam?
There is an element of offshoring that takes place in China, and it's not just that. In fact, the newest trend may be manufacturers closing manufacturing in China in order to bring robot manufacturing to the U.S. So I just read the headline. I don't have the details on this, but there was recently Adidas was announcing a closure of a plant, and I think the laying off of something like 50,000 manufacturing jobs in China because they're going to replace them with robots. So I think that's ultimately where this is going. And so China is going to experience the offshoring and everything that the U.S. experienced a couple of decades ago.
Well, I mean, overall, we have certain countries where the population, if it's not shrinking, is staying the same. So you can't rely on young people to come up and fill these manufacturing jobs, and robots, of course, don't go on strike.
Very true. And perhaps Japan might be at the forefront of that as well, of course, with its shrinking population and aging population, becoming one of the oldest countries and one of the one of the lowest birth rates. So it's very much at the forefront of that trend as well. And as a result, of course, Japan and its association with high tech, there is a love of robotics technology here, and we've seen various versions of household robot type companions that are now being marketed to the public. And of course, they're also working on technologies for robot healthcare workers and other such things. It's still very much a work in progress, but I think that's where things are ultimately heading.
Well, I know they always win the World Robot Soccer Championship.
I didn't even know there was such a thing, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yes, there is. And with this move to robots, I understand, too, in Tokyo, they plan to have robotic taxi cabs up and going for the Tokyo Olympics.
I hadn't even heard of that plan. That's very interesting. So this is self-driving cars along the lines of what Google and others are rolling out?
And I'm sure they probably have multiple language translators on board, so visitors from around the world can ask for directions in French or English or Russian and get to the right hotel most of the time.
One would hope so. I know that there was a big story a few weeks ago about a KFC in China that's now all robot workers, and you can order by talking to the robot, and it will respond to you in Chinese. They don't have English programmed in yet, but I assume the Japanese will get on that for the 2020 Olympics.
Well, in North America, Wendy's and McDonald's are bringing in self-serve kiosks because they're having trouble finding kids to work there anymore.
And rising minimum wage does not help the companies employ people at the bottom end of that scale, people getting into the workforce. So it really does have the effect of driving out a lot of people from the workforce who would otherwise use those minimum wage jobs as the first rung on the ladder. Of course, the idea is, well, we can't have people making trying to scrape together a living on these ridiculous minimum wage and tiny minimum wages, but that's the point. These aren't meant to be jobs that people are going to support their families on. These are meant to be the bottom rung of the economic ladder. And so when they raise the minimum wage, companies are going to start making the calculation.
Could you see a time where perhaps companies will be taxed to supplement the incomes of people displaced by robots?
If the government can find a way to tax it, I'm sure it will. So it'll be interesting to see.
Right, because we all know companies love to be efficient, but what happens when there are no more people working?
A very good question. And this is, I think, fundamentally the question for the economy in the coming decades. And we saw that at Davos this year. That was one of the big topics. They were talking about the rise of the robot workforce and what this will mean for humanity. And I think rightfully so, because this is a genuine question that, yes, right now it seems a bit sci-fi and a bit out there, but it really is starting to become a reality. And if we don't find some way to understand and process this, I think we're going to be caught with our collective pants down when this reality comes knocking on the door.
Well, you can see it being used as an argument for national guaranteed incomes like some countries in Europe already have.
There will be some sort of changeover, and I think there will have to be. But it's really just the question of how that's accomplished. And people might want to liken it back to an industrial revolution, making horse and buggy carriage makers out of fashion, and horseshoe makers out of fashion. It'll be replaced by new jobs. Making the people that make the robots, or making the robots that make the robots, or whatever. But there really does seem to be something different that's happening here, where ultimately it will be a robotic economy. And again, I don't think anyone has any genuine understanding of what that will really mean or how that will play out. And it could work in surprisingly good ways if that is harnessed for its productive capacity, and it could work in horrible ways depending on how people are laid off and what they ultimately end up doing.
Boy, Styx back in the 80s had it right. Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto.
There you go. You can always rely on Styx.
James, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Thank you so much.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments or questions can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.